The other night, I was lying in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. Not fully asleep, not fully awake, that strange in between state. And the thought crossed my mind, what am I going to dream about tonight? That immediately opened the door to a series of questions. What even is a dream? Is it fantasy? Is it prophecy? Is it guidance? Or is it just the brain doing something mechanical while we're unconscious? How do dreams actually work? Why does the brain do this at all? Why do we experience entire worlds while our body is completely still? So I decided to dig into the science behind dreaming, how it works, why it happens, and what it tells us about the brain, and whether those experiences are just noise or something we're meant to pay attention to. Part 1. The Brain. In order to fully understand dreams, and so you can come to your own conclusions, we first need to look at the broader systems they come from. Before we talk about sleep, and before we talk about dreams, we have to understand what is actually doing the dreaming. That means starting with the human brain. The brain is the central control system of the body. It receives information from the senses, processes and interprets it, generates thoughts and emotions, and coordinates behavior. At the same time, it regulates automatic functions like breathing, heart rate, sleep, and even consciousness itself. Everything we experience, awareness, memory, emotion, perception, emerges from how different parts of the brain communicate with one another. Physically, the brain weighs about 1.3 to 1.4 kilograms. It contains roughly 86 billion neurons, forming trillions of synaptic connections. Despite making up only about 2% of total body weight, it actually consumes close to 20% of the body's energy. Whether something happens consciously or unconsciously, it is always the result of coordinated activity across multiple brain systems. Because the brain performs so many different functions at once, neuroscientists divide it into broad regions to make it easier to understand. Explaining the brain in full detail would take days of uninterrupted narration, so for the purpose of this video, we'll focus only on the parts relevant to sleep and dreaming. At the general level, the brain is commonly divided into three main regions. The cerebrum is responsible for thinking, perception, memory, emotion, and voluntary movement. This is where conscious experience and higher cognitive processes take place. The cerebellum is involved in coordination, balance, timing, and motor prediction. It fine-tunes movement and contributes to automatic regulation. The brainstem controls fundamental survival functions such as breathing, heart rate, arousal, and the regulation of consciousness itself. All three regions remain active during sleep, but sleep and dreaming are driven primarily by interactions between the brainstem and specific regions of the cerebrum. The cerebellum continues to function in the background, but it plays a secondary role compared to the brainstem and cerebral cortex, which directly controls sleep states and dream experience. With that foundation in place, we can now look at what actually changes in the brain when we fall asleep. Part 2. Sleep. Now that we have a basic understanding of how the brain is organized, we can narrow our focus to what actually changes when we sleep. Sleep is not a shutdown of the brain, it's a controlled reconfiguration. Instead of all systems operating at once, different regions increase or decrease their activity depending on what the brain needs to do at the moment. Some systems quiet down, others become more active, and the balance between them shifts throughout the night. To understand this process properly, it helps to first identify the main brain structures involved in regulating sleep and shaping what we experience during it. The following brain structures are the primary ones involved in sleep regulation and dream generation, either directly or indirectly. Suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, the brain's primary circadian clock that uses light input from the eyes to synchronize sleep-wake cycles through the day-night rhythm. Hypothalamus, VLPO, initiates and maintains sleep by actively inhibiting wake-promoting and arousal systems in the brain. Brainstem, reticular activating system, regulates overall arousal and consciousness and helps switch the brain between wakefulness, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep. Thalamus acts as a sensory gate, reducing external sensory input to the cortex during sleep so the brain can disengage from the outside world. Cortex, neocortex, supports conscious experience, thought, memory integration, and slow wave activity during non-REM sleep. Hippocampus, involved in memory formation and replay, transferring and reorganizing memories between itself and the cortex during sleep. Amygdala, processes emotional significance and threat, showing increased activity during REM sleep and contributing to emotional dream content. Prefrontal cortex, DLP FC, responsible for executive control, logic, and reality monitoring. Its reduced activity during REM explains impaired reasoning in dreams. Occipital cortex generates visual imagery, allowing dreams to be experienced visually without external sensory input. Basal forebrain regulates sleep pressure and cortical activation through neuromodulators such as acetylcholine and adenosine. Locus coeruleus, major source of norepinephrine, largely inactive during REM sleep, contributing to reduced alertness and critical thinking. Raphe-nuclei, major source of serotonin, decreased activity during REM sleep alters mood regulation and cognitive control. Pedunculopontine lateral dorsal tegmental nuclei, brainstem nuclei that release acetylcholine and actively drive REM sleep and cortical activation. Glymphatic system clears metabolic waste from the brain via cerebrospinal fluid flow, functioning most effectively during deep, non-REM sleep. Brainstem, pons, triggers REM sleep and enforces muscle paralysis, REM atonia, preventing physical movement during dreams. Associative cortex, distributed cortical regions that link concepts and memories loosely, enabling symbolic, non-linear dream narratives. Taken together, these systems don't all operate at the same level at the same time. Instead, sleep unfolds in stages, each defined by a different pattern of brain activity. Sleep is broadly divided into non-REM sleep and REM sleep, which alternate in cycles of roughly 19 minutes. During non-REM sleep, overall brain activity slows and becomes more synchronized. This stage is primarily involved in physical recovery, energy restoration, memory consolidation, and neural recalibration. Thought-like mental activity can occur, but it is usually weak, fragmented, and low in emotional intensity. By the way, this is the reason why naps are often recommended to last around 20 to 30 minutes. In that time window, the brain usually remains in lighter stages of non-REM sleep, which can improve alertness and memory without entering deeper sleep. Longer naps increase the likelihood of entering REM sleep, which can lead to sleep inertia, that heavy, groggy feeling that happens when the brain is pulled out of a deeper sleep state. REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, is a fundamentally different brain state. During REM sleep, brain activity increases to near waking levels, while the body is temporarily paralyzed. Emotional, memory, and sensory regions remain active, while areas responsible for logic and reality checking reduce their activity. This unique configuration is what allows vivid dreams to occur. REM sleep becomes longer and more frequent in the second half of the night, which is why dreams are often most vivid close to waking. With this framework in place, we can now look at what happens when these systems line up in a very specific way, and how that configuration produces the experience we call dreams. Part 3. Dreams. Within the broader systems involved in sleep, dreaming emerges when a specific subset of brain regions remain active under REM sleep conditions. During this state, emotional memory and sensory systems remain highly engaged, while regions responsible for logic, self-monitoring, and reality checking reduce their activity. This unique configuration produces the subjective experience we call a dream. Before going further, it's important to clarify that not all dreams are the same. Dreaming can occur during both non-REM sleep and REM sleep, but the experiences differ significantly. Non-REM dreams tend to be quiet, thought-like, and low in emotional intensity. They often consist of fragments of worries, plans, or recent events, and usually lack vivid imagery or a strong narrative structure. REM dreams, on the other hand, are vivid, emotional, immersive, and story-like. This is where intense imagery, symbolism, and powerful feelings emerge. When people talk about dreams, they are almost always referring to REM dreams, and that is the type of dreaming this section focuses on. When the brain enters REM sleep, several key systems align in a very specific way. Brainstem, pons. The pons switches the brain into REM sleep and actively shuts down motor output through REM atonia. This keeps the brain internally active while preventing the body from physically acting out the dream. Amygdala plus hippocampus. The amygdala amplifies emotional intensity, while the hippocampus pulls fragments of memories, people, and past experiences. Together, they provide the emotional charge and raw narrative material that dreams are built from. Visual cortex, occipital lobe. With external sensory input blocked, the visual cortex generates imagery internally. This is why dreams are experienced visually even though the eyes are closed and no visual information is coming in. Associative cortex. These regions link ideas based on emotional or conceptual similarity rather than logic or time. This loose association is what produces symbolism, sudden scene changes, and bizarre combinations that still feel meaningful. Prefrontal cortex, DLPFC. This area normally handles logic, self-monitoring, and reality checking. Its reduced activity during REM explains why contradictions go unnoticed. This specific brain state directly explains several core features of dreaming. Why dreams are emotional. Because the amygdala remains highly active during REM, while regulatory systems are reduced. Emotional salience isn't dampened or contextualized, so feelings come through stronger and less filtered than in waking life. Why dreams reuse real people inaccurately. The hippocampus retrieves identity and memory fragments, but the brain does not verify visual or factual accuracy. You recognize who someone is without reconstructing them correctly, because realism is not being checked. Why dreams feel meaningful but irrational. Meaning is generated through emotional association, not logical reasoning. The associative cortex links ideas based on relevance and feeling, while the prefrontal cortex is offline, so coherence exists emotionally, not logically. Why you don't question absurdity. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which normally flags contradictions and implausibility, is largely inactive. Without that system online, impossible situations feel normal. Why you don't act dreams out physically. The pons reduces rhematonia, shutting down motor output at the spinal level. The brain can simulate action internally while the body remains immobile. A quick summary in scientific terms: the amygdala amplifies emotional salience, the hippocampus replays emotionally tagged memories, and the prefrontal cortex, being offline, removes rational suppression and reframing. In other words, emotions you ignore or suppress while awake get replayed without filter during REM, sometimes repeatedly, leading to recurring dreams or nightmares. What dreams are and aren't. Dreams don't predict the future and they don't carry universal symbolic meanings. But recurring or emotionally intense dreams can reflect unresolved emotional stress in waking life. Dreams aren't random noise, and they aren't coded messages either. They're what happens when the brain processes emotion and memory while the usual filters of logic, skepticism, and self-monitoring are turned down. Because of this, dreams pull from real experiences, real people, and real emotional concerns, but remix them in distorted or symbolic ways. The brain isn't trying to tell a logically consistent story, it's trying to work through emotional load. This also explains why stress, anxiety, trauma, alcohol use, medication withdrawal, and sleep disorders affect dreams so strongly. All of these either increase emotional activation, disrupt sleep architecture, or cause REM rebound, meaning the brain spends more time in the state where dreaming is most intense. Dreams aren't information coming from outside the body, and they aren't prophecies being implanted into the brain while we're unconscious, but that doesn't mean they're meaningless. Emotional processing is a form of information, and when the same emotions, themes, or scenarios repeat themselves, especially in intense or recurring dreams, that isn't randomness. That's unresolved material being replayed, potentially pointing to emotional conflicts, stressors, or patterns that aren't fully accepted or addressed during waking life. Here's how this mechanism showed up for me. A few years ago, there was a period where I felt surrounded by messaging that framed fighting as something natural, even necessary, especially for men. Social media, conversations, the general tone of things made it feel like conflict was something you were supposed to be ready for or even looking for. Even though I'm not a violent person and I don't believe in violence, I remember walking around with this constant internal tension, almost expecting something to happen, like my mind had adopted a narrative that didn't really match who I was emotionally. During that period, I kept having the same recurring dream. Someone would wrong me, break something of mine, hit me first, cross a line, situations where retaliation would feel justified. But no matter what happened, I couldn't physically punch them. Either my movements were slowed down, my punch landed with no force, or I simply couldn't connect at all. I remember even feeling frustrated by it, wondering why I couldn't act, even inside my own dreams. Looking back now, the dream wasn't guidance in the sense of being told what path to take. It was guidance in the sense that it revealed where the problem was. It showed me, emotionally and repeatedly, that the narrative I was carrying didn't align with who I actually was, and once that conflict resolved while awake, the dream had no reason to repeat itself. Before wrapping this up, it's worth briefly addressing a few common types of dreams people often ask about. These aren't separate phenomena, they're variations of the same system. Lucid dreams occur when parts of the prefrontal cortex partially reactivate during REM sleep. That's why the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming and may gain limited control. It's not a different kind of dream, it's a different balance of brain activity. Vivid dreams happen when emotional and sensory systems are especially active. They're more intense, more realistic, and more memorable, often during stress, REM rebound, or disrupted sleep. Nightmares are dreams where emotional circuits, especially the amygdala, are strongly activated. They're commonly linked to stress, anxiety, or trauma, and often repeat when emotional material hasn't been resolved. False awakenings occur when the brain simulates waking consciousness inside a dream. The environment feels familiar because memory and perception systems are active, but reality-checking systems are still offline. All of these experiences come from the same core mechanism: memory, emotion, and imagery interacting under different levels of conscious control. Scientists still don't fully agree on why dreams exist or what their ultimate purpose is, but we do understand how they work. Dreams aren't fantasy worlds created at random, and they aren't messages coming from outside of us. They're the result of very real brain systems processing emotion and memory when the usual filters of logic and control are turned down. Personally, I don't see dreams as prophecies, but I don't see them as meaningless either. I think they show us, visually and emotionally, how we're actually feeling beneath the surface. They replay what carries weight, what hasn't been resolved, and what the brain keeps returning to when it's finally quiet. In that sense, dreams are guidance telling us what to do, but they can shed light on what matters, what hurts, and what might need attention once we're awake.